Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Research Ireland, Taida Éireann, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's forum. Whether you're joining us here in person or connecting online, we are grateful for your presence and participation. It's wonderful to see such a strong and diverse turnout representing our vibrant research and innovation ecosystem. We're joined today by colleagues from across academia, industry, government, and from our national and international funding partners. That in itself is a reflection of the collaborative spirit that drives our work and the importance of the conversations we are about to have today. The establishment of Research Ireland marks the beginning of an exciting new chapter in Ireland's research and innovation story. Building on the heritage of Science Foundation Ireland and the Irish Research Council, and taking the strengths of both organisations, we are building a more inclusive, integrated, and ambitious system that spans all disciplines and fields of inquiry, from blue skies to applied research, from humanities to frontier science. This transition is not just organisational, it is cultural. It's about shaping a new model of research funding and support that reflects the complexity of the challenges we face and the creativity of the people we support. We have made a priority from the outset to minimise disruption to the research community while building the foundations of a streamlined and more effective funding system. Much of this work has been quiet but important. Systems integration, stakeholder engagement, and the development of our first corporate plan. Since the beginning of this year, we've undertaken an extensive programme of consultation, today's forum being part of it. We've listened and we've learned, and we will be putting that learning into our plans and actions. Our corporate plan, which will set out direction through to 2030, is a work in progress. This plan will be our collective opportunity to articulate a bold vision for research and innovation in Ireland, one that reflects our national ambitions, our global responsibilities, and our belief in the transformative power of knowledge. The government, through the establishment of Research Ireland, has laid down a clear ambition to create a world-class research and innovation system that delivers impact across society. Realising that ambition will take all of us working together across boundaries of discipline, sector, and geography, and it will take funding at a much higher level than is currently provided. And that doesn't just mean funding from the department, it means funding sources that can be innovative, and we'll be talking about that later. We are especially pleased to be working with Minister Lawless and the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. Their support and vision and funding are vital to our success. We are committed to working in close partnership with researchers, with institutions, with industry, with civil society, and with our colleagues across government departments and agencies. We also value our international relationships and will continue to look outward, learn from best practice, and build collaborations that position Ireland at the forefront of global research. We have many challenges to face and barriers to overcome, both nationally and internationally. From the PhD educational model and whether PhD candidates are employees or students or both, to the effects of tariffs and taco trades on our mega industries and the consequent impact on research and innovation here in Ireland. As with all challenges, we need to be ready to spot the opportunities also. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our board members, many of whom are with us today, for their guidance and commitment, and to recognise our dedicated senior leadership team and the staff of Research Ireland for organising today. I especially want to thank our interim CEO, Celine Fitzgerald, whose calm leadership has been invaluable during this transitional period. Celine, thank you for all you've done and continue to do for Research Ireland. I'd like to extend a special thanks to our speakers and panel members. Your insights are vital, and I'm particularly pleased to welcome Dr. Diarmuid O'Brien, our incoming CEO, who officially joins us in September. Diarmuid brings deep experience, strategic thinking, and a collaborative spirit that I know will serve this new agency very well. Finally, it is an honour to welcome our keynote speaker, Mark Little. Many of you will know Mark as an innovative thinker at the intersection of technology, media, and public trust. He is the founder of Storyful, co-founder of Kinzen, and a veteran journalist who has worked to understand the impact of technology and democracy and society. He's also a serial entrepreneur. Mark's address, Unlocking Ireland's Research and Innovation Potential in a Rapidly Changing Global Landscape, could not be more timely or more relevant. We are also delighted he will be joining Siobhan Roche, our Director of Research for the Economy, for what promises to be a thought-provoking panel session. So now please join me in welcoming Mark Little to the stage.
Thank you, Michael. My current job is to avoid being a serial entrepreneur again. My wife has told me that she will kill me if I start another company, given the pressure of trying to be an entrepreneur in the first place. I was going to talk about the global order, but I want to start by saying what I think, listening to Michael and knowing the challenge that Diarmuid and Research Ireland face here, it's kind of an impossible challenge. That in a world today, what we're trying to do is bring some sense of stability and order and planning to research in Ireland, in a world defined by the exact opposite, by chaos, by disruption, by lack of uncertainty about anything in the world. You're planning for research in 10 years' time in a world that's changing by next Wednesday. How in the hell do you find opportunity for a stable plan in an age of chaos? Which is something that if you're an innovator in the room, your immediate reaction is excitement. And certainly for me coming here today thinking about this challenge, that's been the way. For other people in the room, it'll be a fear. And that's okay. And my role, I think, in life, I've only ever had one skill beside hiring people smarter than me, is to be able to go into a team of people as a journalist, as a startup entrepreneur, as a big tech executive, and the teams that I care about, be able to communicate what I can see around the corner with the future in a way that makes them feel that they have some power, they have some lever they can pull that will create a beneficial solution. And so I'm always the person in these big tech companies called the evangelist, which I kind of resent. I always say I'm a rational optimist, and I would go in those rooms and I would say, listen, I'm basing my optimism about the future on the cold hard data in my lifetime. Like I was born 50 odd years ago. In that time, science and technology has made the world a better place on every single index of human development, from life expectancy to poverty to equality. Has never been a better time to be alive. And in that time, that's because of science and technology primarily. And if ever I had doubt when something went wrong in terms of progress moving forward, I was always relied on that great old line from Martin Luther King, who once said, you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, the inevitability of progress. And I believed in that entirely until I didn't. Until I can't really put my finger on the time that I became someone who was more of a responsible panicker, less of a rational optimist. But I think it was about the time that I was part of a movement to fight back against misinformation, which I suddenly realized was actually just a symptom of a much deeper structural problem that I can even date, because it's 2003, that the amount of data information created in the world in the 12 months of 2003 is more than the data information created in the tens of thousands of years of human civilization. And when a society gets overwhelmed by that amount of data and information, the brain of society just ceases to be able to process it. And so what happens around this time is that we move from an information age where the people who hold the power, the people who have the facts and the information and the expertise and the scientists and the journalists, to an age of attention where the people who have the power are the masters of spectacle, the people who can come along and distract us for enough time to change the subject, the people who don't have to be holding the truth, the people who persuade us that everybody's telling a lie. And that is the source, I think, of a lot of the disillusionment that I felt over recent years, accelerated to an extent by a growing awareness that even when AI was not the big conversation, algorithmic AI was accelerating a lot of these negative trends within the information crisis that was emerging. It was eroding the sense of shared reality, and yet at the same time I discovered that algorithms in themselves are human recipes. They're not magic, they're not neutral. They can bend to the will of creative, inspiring people. And so when generative AI suddenly captured the public consciousness, the launch of ChatGPT, I suddenly realized people think this is just another digital transformation, and it's not, for two big reasons. The first, obviously, is speed of adoption. So it takes, what, a half a century for the internet to have its full impact in the world, 20 years for social media, and we have within 3 years hundreds of millions of people using this particular form of technology in their daily lives, the fastest adopted consumer technology ever. The second difference, I think, is the scale of the impact. Now, everyone in this room knows the famous saying that we tend to overestimate the impact of a technology in the short term and underestimate its impact in the long term. And I think that's definitely the case with AI. I think this current wave of agentic AI will, confound, dumbfound, and disillusion people, I think. But I've no doubt that in the long term, the transformational impact of AI in its broadest sense in areas like health and education, and I hope energy, will be fundamental to the progress of humanity. And I think a lot about Dario Amodei, who's one of the more thoughtful of the AI community, the CEO of Anthropic. He talks about this being the compressed 21st century, and he's talking about research where the trial and error and the launch of a new breakthrough medicine, which might have taken decades, even a century, could happen in years and potentially months. Now, whether you believe him or not, it's really worthwhile keeping that compressed 21st century phraseology in your mind. Because I do every time I think about politics and the geopolitics that we're caught up in at the moment. Because I think politics has moved from this kind of analog world where every issue is discrete, we solved it, we move forward in increments, maybe you move back a little bit, but we always went forward, right? No. Today, quantum politics is where uncertainty is the core of the system. You have to hold contradictory states to be true at the same time. AI could lengthen our lives. AI could destroy humanity. Both kind of exist in the same moment. You have to think also about the idea that now every system, every policy, every problem is a completely interdependent system. So you take climate, for example. Used to be a policy of net zero, and it was a discrete problem we were solving, but it's not. Climate impacts every aspect of our lives, from the energy supply to the grid, to the supply chain, to food production, to travel, every aspect. You solve one aspect of that problem, you create something over here. So the interdependence of systems defies liberal democracy. And the people who do really well in quantum politics are the easy answer people, or the dictators and the totalitarianism. What do we have in liberal democracy? We have political systems that are defined by daily news cycles and short-term horizons, and we're trying to build decades into the future infrastructure to supply and make our lives better. And I have to say, and it's no disrespect to Irish politicians, but I think Ireland is far more exposed to the sharp edge of quantum politics because of our success in so many ways. We have an AI arms race about to develop. The US AI company spending $500 billion on AI infrastructure as of January of this year. That's twice as much spent on the Apollo program. And of course, that it will have a downwind impact, again, because of the success of our country in terms of the pressure on our infrastructure. We know this. Data centers creating a demand for maybe a third of our electricity in 3-4 years' time. At the same time, our politicians are struggling to supply the basic infrastructure of life, water, electricity, to the people of Ireland. Now, if we're left with just a binary choice between climate and economic growth, we've already lost. Like, there's no way we have a healthy democracy in 10 years' time if we cannot solve this kind of conundrum. And I know this sounds like a state of control panic on my part. I think that's the appropriate way to look at it. And then what's missing at the moment, most of all, I think, in Irish democracy, is not the solutions, but the lack of a compelling story of the future. And that is the thing I would love for everyone today to walk out of this room feeling, that the enormous opportunity and responsibility of everybody in this room is to be the people that tell that compelling story of the future. Not just about the Irish economy, but about Irish life, about Irish community well-being, about intergenerational fairness. That's the story of the future that I think we can be talking about today. And let's just do a little theoretical, right? Let's just say Ireland tomorrow morning decided that I want to do an Irish moonshot. What would be the kind of sovereign, industrial, economic, social strategy that we would implement with a bit of good money behind us? Well, first of all, it would be a policy of two sides, right? We would continue, and I know IDA are doing this, to keep foreign direct investment as a backbone of the Irish economy and go up the value chain. At the very same time, we'd have EI, Enterprise Ireland, doing what we think we plan to do, to build 275,000 new jobs, but more importantly, 1,000 new startups that are funding innovation, building a domestic innovation sector. We know exactly where they're going to flourish. They're going to flourish on the application layer on top of these big, large language models, building solutions for people in areas that we're already really good at, in the life sciences, in agriculture, and fintech. Now, there are risks here, right? The application layer of AI right now is unproven. Huge amounts of companies make big investments, haven't seen a return yet. And I think it's really well worth thinking about the opportunity of AI as a kind of a vertical where we'll be the kind of tenants sitting on top of those large language models, making good money and producing jobs, and the incredible opportunity of a horizontal floodplain of artificial intelligence. That's a world of open source models, of models that are optimized for specific purposes, that are a form of AI where a small team of gifted people can sit down and have a model optimized for a particular purpose and produce an outsized result. I think about AlphaFold winning the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year. You know, that great groundbreaking breakthrough in protein structures didn't have a large language model behind it. The breakthrough research being done to try get early detection of, let's say, pancreatic cancer is not being done with large language models. And we have, for example, in the area of like weather forecasting, climate model, again, being done by energy efficient small models with applications specifically optimized. And in all of these places where the research is happening, and it's deep research, it's happening with cross-functional teams where people who have the business savvy also talk to people with the deep science, with the applied research. And if I want to give you an example of how this works, I have personal experience of this. My last startup, called Kinzen, addressed online safety. Myself and Anya, my co-founder, got a good big check from Enterprise Ireland. We were publicly funded. We went out and we found an open source NLP transformer. We built a product that basically served all the big tech companies of the world, keeping their users and their citizens safer. One company liked us so much, they bought us, and the day that they bought us, they announced an R&D investment in Ireland, right? So people say, you know, all that deep research being done in universities, like the idea of unlocking those small teams, those small compounding innovations, has an incredible feedback loop for domestic, for international. It's not, has to be a choice between the two. So if we look for models, we always look to Silicon Valley. We always learn the wrong lesson, right? Yes, Silicon Valley is a fierce furnace of private enterprise and venture capital, but every great discovery and every great breakthrough has been made with public money, with public investment, with partnerships between industry and universities. And even if you look at the way that they measure innovation, it's not always in national income or the amount of jobs. It's about how quickly can you move and fix things in a society. So the challenge potentially for this community today is to be thinking not about the size of the economy, but fixing the problems in our society, confronting those what seem to be unsolvable problems. That is the focus. That's where the impact happens. And for me, when I think about the objective of building out big unicorn companies to rival the Googles, that would be great. But way more important for me would be thinking about the kind of investment in that kind of cross-functional research that's happening where you can produce breakthroughs that have compounding effects in terms of innovation in science and technology. And I'll leave you with the example again of the moonshot, which is actually probably the wrong example, right? It took $250 billion in today's money to get a human being on the moon in 1969. In the same year, a middle-ranking manager in DARPA, the advanced research community, publicly funded state institution, took $1 million from one budget and put into another budget and created what we now know as the internet. Small amount of investment with someone who was business savvy and committed to science and technology produces, I think, the most consequential piece of innovation in our lifetime. Because what it's done is not simply created a rich country or a rich company, it's provided an acceleration of open and collaborative technology. And if that was our model, if that was our definition of moonshot, then it would be this community who go out and sell that story of the future. And it's this community that can then start talking about the need for the size of the checks that we have to write for public funding, the right mix of private and the right mix of public. Start talking about $1 billion, billion euros, but not necessarily just to grow the economy, to be solving the problems of the society that we live in. Telling a story, a compelling story about the future, is the route to achieving the kind of funding that we need, but also I think the complexities is to measure it the right way. And so I'll leave you again with this idea about the quantum political era that we live in. And for me, you know, a state of absolute defined uncertainty is the most creative place to be. But it's not necessarily what people feel in this country right now. And if there was one thing this group of people could do, all of you together as you leave today, is to think about that challenge, to be able to say to the Irish people that when nothing is certain, that's the point where everything is possible. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your patience. I think we're...
Thanks so much, Mark, for those really insightful opening comments. I'm Siobhan Roche. I'm Director of Research for the Economy at Research Ireland, and I have the privilege this morning of chairing our first panel, which is all about collaboration for innovation and driving progress through partnership. And partnership, I think, is a central theme across all of the panels today. This is our opportunity to create our research ecosystem into the future. So we want to work with you to get your views and really shape that strategy into the future. So while I go through a few housekeeping comments, I might invite the panel to come up on the stage, and I'll introduce you now in a moment. But in terms of kind of the format, we're going to start with a discussion, and that discussion is very much based on the input that has come through all of the consultations that have taken place to date. So some of the key themes that have been shared with Research Ireland. And then we're going to come to you and the audience, both in person and online. And I'd really encourage you to input your comments. You may have comments based on Mark's opening remarks, based on the discussion that happened now, based on maybe ideas that you felt like you haven't had an opportunity to input into the organisation yet. So this is your opportunity. We will have a mic that will circulate around the room so that you can comment in person as well. There's a QR code will appear on the screen, I think, at some stage, that you can also share thoughts through that. So I'll now move to the panel and introduce our prestigious panel today. We've had lots of really interesting discussions in advance of the meeting. So I'd like to first introduce Dr. Liam Brown. He's the Vice President for Research, Development and Innovation at the Technological University of the Shannon. I have Marina Donohoe, who's Divisional Manager for Research, Innovation and Infrastructure at Enterprise Ireland, and Matt Kennedy, Head of Client Transformation at IDA, and you've already been introduced to Mark. And I should say, we all interact on a daily basis, so we're very close partners in helping to drive the research system in Ireland. So I first come to you, Mark. So you've made a lot of really, I think, thought-provoking opening comments about this really challenging global environment that we're in and the impossible challenge that Research Ireland has now in trying to develop this strategy into the future. But we have this amazing opportunity by this widened remit that the organisation has, and we're a small country, we can work together really well. You've highlighted, I guess you talked a lot about a moonshot and kind of throwing out that challenge to us. I guess in terms of now distilling that down into maybe actionable strategies that Research Ireland should be thinking about, what you've raised a lot of opportunities and potential priorities there, but what would you advise Research Ireland in terms of kind of that next stage?
Well, I'm kind of an outsider in the sense that I've gone through all the aspects of this conversation, but in kind of siloed ways. So, for example, I described my own journey within innovation, where I desperately wanted to find a way to work within a university setting, and amazing people I met, but just didn't work out properly on the IP side. So that practical problem of like, when we sell this company, it did happen actually. We did take a piece of IP from a university. We had to unpick it all for the future acquirer. They didn't know how much value was being derived from that technology, and it was a real sticking point. So second time around, I was a bit more nervous about that. So the siloing, I think, of different elements, like you speak to a big multinational who has a center of excellence in this country, they may as well be in another country sometimes by the level of exposure they might have to some of the more creative people within universities. Similarly, with startups, they want to get on that plane to New York and they want to get on that plane to San Francisco. And so it's just this weird thing where we have this most incredibly creative, inventive, innovative people who tend to get celebrated abroad before they come home. Like I'm just reading profiles of Sarah Fryer, an exceptional Irish entrepreneur, but it's only when she gets to OpenAI internationally do we celebrate at home. So it's the siloing of like the applied research for science's sake, and then someone comes in from the business side and goes, this is how you solve a problem. So the key of innovation to me is, it's not coming up with a solution or a piece of research in the wild that has no application. It's finding a problem to solve. And in Ireland right now, I wouldn't necessarily be going for the moonshot on sustainable energy by working out how to make the grid more efficient. I'd be working on ways with groups of people to think about the creative industries. Could the Irish copyright legislation, European copyright legislation, be written for AI in a way that could lead to an explosion of derivative value from what we are already about, creativity? So these, where the choke points and the interdependent systems that I've talked about lend themselves to groups of people that have awareness of the business problem, the deep science, and then the people supporting from EI, IDA, and then also from those big multinationals. Because what they desperately want, and I know this, going to San Francisco and I worked at Twitter, they weren't looking necessarily for people with the groundbreaking ideas. They were looking for the leaders, the creative people. And they're the people who get promoted in multinationals. So they should be coming, I think, as much from science backgrounds as business backgrounds. So it's the silos. Can we break them down? Yeah. And not have to bypass all these wonderful institutions to get to an international success? That's my experience.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the real opportunities for Ireland as a small country, is that we can do that partnership well. And with the widened remit for Research Ireland, we should be better about bringing different disciplines together, and kind of really struck by in your opening comments that interdependence of these big policy challenges that we face at the moment, and that you need to bring different parts of the system together to really be able to look at them holistically, and that is a real opportunity that we have going forward. So I don't know if any of the other panel members want to contribute further to that discussion.
I might come in, Siobhan, thank you. And I very much agree with Mark, right? Let's look at uncertainty as the opportunity. And I think it's a case that, we've often said, innovate or die. You have to embrace change. You have to take on change. If we stand still and we're not moving, we're going to be left behind. So I suppose that's the first message. And I think you're right in terms of silos. We have to break down silos and make sure that we work together in terms of universities, the technological and the traditional universities come together on various opportunities, be they through the existing research, formerly SFI, now Research Ireland research centres, the Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland technology centres, the technology gateways, right? And I think it's important that we're able to work together, and not everybody does everything. You bring the opportunities and those that can do particular tasks better together. So not everybody does everything. And I will challenge one thing from Mark, and look, coming from the technological university sector, our bread and butter is applied research. So we live and die in the RDI space by the applied research that we're undertaking with our company collaborators. But we have to continue to invest in the groundbreaking, the basic research, the blue skies research, because if we don't, we will be left behind in 5, 10, 15 years' time. So I think it's important the continuum is kept. And finally, and again, I don't want to take too much time, but it's not just the universities, it's also the agencies. I think it's listen, you've got Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland, Research Ireland. Let's make sure that discourse and discussion continues. Make sure that we're working together for the optimum benefit of the country and beyond.
Absolutely, absolutely. And certainly in terms of the excellent research, that is the bedrock for everything else that we collectively develop in the system, as well as, Mark, you talked about trying to get the multinationals focused in Ireland. If that excellent research and those research leaders aren't there, we will lose out on that. So it is absolutely the bedrock of what we do. Marina?
Yeah, just a couple of points. And first off, congratulations, Research Ireland, a really pivotal moment for you. And to Dermot, I think he's in the audience somewhere. Congratulations. No, delighted to be here. And from an Enterprise Ireland perspective, you know, we're just after embarking on our new strategy. And it is a hugely challenging and complicated time. But it's also a very exciting time in the context of what Ireland could do and what we can achieve. But I think to all the points that have been referenced, we need to be really super focused. We need to be incredibly collaborative. We need to take risks and have the ability and the confidence to fail and to fail fast and to move on. I think we need to embrace the wide variety of sectors and opportunities that exist for us. You know, there's a tendency to look at just science-based. There's a tendency to figure it's all going to be tech, but that sort of the creative industries, where does that fit? How do we bring AI into food, into innovation on a food perspective? You know, you spoke about the challenge in terms of sustainability. We are an island. We have incredible resource off the island in terms of wind energy, wave energy. How do we together find we know what the problems are, but, you know, move fast, fund at scale, and work in a really collaborative way. Lots to be positive about, and I know ask for, you know, the researchers in the room, you know, it is about the groundbreaking advances, the excellent science that's underway. How do we translate that to have social impact, to have economic impact? And from a country perspective, if you look at our investment in public research and the spin-outs that come from it, the figure is 4.5 per 100 million in research invested. Like, that's comparable. That's much better than a lot of other countries, the US, the UK, 2.5 on. So, you know, we're doing pretty good about spinning out, but it's the scale agenda is the one that we're really focused on within Enterprise Ireland. And our strategy is about scaling businesses such that they are going to be powering the Irish economy in decades to come. So a super ambition to have, and I think it's that togetherness, it's the connectivity, it's the collaboration that is important.
I'm actually going to move on, unless you have a quick comment.
I was just going to make a quick comment to say that, and it's wonderful, I would agree, in terms of opportunity comes from uncertainty, but the funny other side of that coin is we need policy certainty. So in an area of uncertainty where we can be creative, we need policy certainty to attract investment, to have stable, like stipends, fellowships for industry fellows, a clear pathway. So that isn't uncertain. That becomes more certain in terms of fixed policy, and whether that's around our energy policy, our semiconductor policy announced last week, our future life sciences policy, and delivering and implementing and delivering that at scale. That is an area where we don't need uncertainty in terms of attracting investment. That's where we need really policy certainty.
And equally, there's an opportunity then for the research that we fund to help shape that future policy, and that is something that's a real opportunity. I'm going to move on.
I know you are. Very quick one, because just to finish off on this point, and I think you're right, Matt, right? So we have to have certainty in policy. If we don't have the right policies, we are in trouble, right? So we have to act on that. But the other point, I think, and we spoke about the collective. We've mentioned the creative side, absolutely, right? So we have to have our creatives in there. We have LSAD, for example, our Limerick School of Art and Design is our Faculty of Art and Design, renowned in its own right. So we'd be pushing that. But I'm also adamant that it's not just science and technology is critical. okay, we're here. Science technology is going to drive what we do, but it needs to get out there. We need the social scientists. We need the business community. We have to make sure that whatever we do on the research side, it makes its way into the real world. And we, as scientists, as engineers, we need our business collaborators, be they commercialization specialists, be they social scientists, as I say, to make its way into society or into the companies. And to make that difference, it has to be all-inclusive, Siobhan.
And leading in then from that, the research endeavour, I guess there's only certain capabilities and expertise that we have within Ireland, but to be able to really derive full impact from that research, we need to look internationally as well. We need to partner internationally. And given all of the global changes that are happening that may shape the future of how we partner as a small country into the future, I know there's a lot of debate at the moment about do we and this has come through the consultation strategies that have taken place, is do we double down on Europe and engage in put a lot more emphasis on multilateral collaborations? Do we continue with bilateral collaborations with some key partners? And if so, what would those partners be? So I think this is an area that we need to think about going forward in terms of this globally, rapidly changing environment that's changing week to week.
100%. Right, so and you're right, and I think I don't want to be sitting on or answering it two ways, but we have to answer it two ways. We have to continue our deep, embedded engagement with Europe. The importance of the framework programme, the importance of the cohesion funding, bringing those collaborations together. And again, it's not just in Ireland in terms of where the expertise exists. We have to work with those global leaders in Europe and beyond, right? So, and I think, from a European perspective, I can't talk enough about how important those collaborative projects and how they are actually making a real difference both to society and to the economies that we're working with. And but we have to do more. And I think, so in terms of on the bilateral side, and so just to continue with the European side, one of the initiatives that is gaining a lot of traction at the moment, and certainly Ireland Inc., all the universities in Ireland Inc. are involved in the European University Initiative. These are formal alliances between various universities across Europe in the main. And this was a Macron initiative to look at how we can create universities of scale at a European level that can compete internationally. That's what we're trying to do. We, for example, in TUS, lead one of those alliances, the RUN-EU, Regional University Network European University Alliance, 10 partners, all in regional locations. So it's the non-capitals that are faced with similar problems across different parts of Europe. And again, we have structured our alliance across 3 pillars, looking at the big challenges that we face, be it on the digitalization, future sustainable industry, be it on the bioeconomy and the green agenda that we're facing, and social inclusion. It is so important that we bring everybody with us. It is not just the privileged that have the opportunity to benefit from what we're doing. We have to ensure that we do what we can do to bring everybody with us. And go back to the second part of your question. We have to push more on the bilateral side. We are working, and I know there's a number of initiatives in train and being pushed for Ireland to collaborate more with, for example, Canada. There are a number of Canadian universities that Irish universities are engaging with. We need to push more of that, right? Also South America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, lots of those countries, and of course Asia, right? So I mean, I think China, in terms of the scale that it's at, the technologies, the universities that they have, the companies that they have, we have to continue to collaborate. Obviously, be cognizant of what's going on and ensure that we've controls in place. China, India, and other parts of the world, Malaysia, for example, and multiple other countries. So we have to keep going, both in terms of the multilateral and the bilateral, and for that, we have to continue to invest and to lead. And I think I'll leave it with this. The old adage still holds true. So in terms of the US innovates, Asia replicates, and Europe regulates, we have to move from that mindset. And by collaborating internationally, we will get there.
Thank you. Matt, I might come to you now in terms of As you know, over the last 25 years, Ireland has become a very strong place, a global leader in collaborative research and innovation, and really driving that knowledge out into application. Given the pressure that's facing our economic model right now, and I think, Mark, and other things, you may have described it as it's a schizophrenic kind of model going forward, in that we need to really focus on protecting and scaling the existing FDI, while also then trying to grow, as you talked about, Marina, in terms of EI strategy, growing the indigenous industry as well, and how this is something that has come through the consultation. How do we get the right balance to make sure we are serving both, basically, economic arms that we need to be focused on?
Yeah, it's funny that people think of SMEs on one side, or high potential startups on one side, and multinationals on the other, and never the two shall meet. But actually, in practice, that's not at all the way it works. And actually, if we give it a couple of examples, so analog devices, bringing back in some link to Europe, and analog devices last year invested 630 million in R&D in terms of its technology, and that's from my perspective, that's really significant in terms of kind of wafer technology, but the development of the semicon industry. But that isn't happening within a vacuum. That got support from Europe in terms of project of common interest, analog, with loads of SMEs, high potentials around them, university sector around them, all investing together. So the multinationals, and like you can take example of MasterCard here in the fintech side with 1,000 people in R&D. You can talk about Stryker, you can talk about Boston and Galway. All of these examples have around them rotating high potential startups that are actually on their supply chain, that are mutually dependent on each other in terms of delivering success. So, and I would move away from the idea of protecting. What you want to do is enable and actually try to keep up with their ambition. We have life science companies in Ireland, we have tech companies in Ireland, green engineering and economy companies with massive ambition for scale, for growth. So the strategy at the moment is to deepen our relationship with the existing companies and corporates that are there. But actually, we're seeing great interaction between the two. I'll give you one other example. When I look at a company like Deciphex, based in DCU, really, really strong in terms of pathology, in terms of a startup, and they're collaborating with Novartis in terms of the, and it's really around lesion detection within tissues. And that shows the interaction, I guess, between an institution like DCU, a startup spin-out coming out of it, and a multinational Novartis all working in healthcare. You can see the exact same thing in opportunities and engagement with companies like Nibert in terms of its training with Hanon Life Sciences. So there's a lot of interaction between SME companies that Marina takes care of, in terms of EI indigenous companies, and IDA clients that we're attracting. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to just enable them, encourage them, and actually respond with their ambition to deliver real transformative impact. And they would automatically say, well, what about the talent? Where are we going to get the future talent in terms of stimulating that type of collaboration? And that's what we're also needing to harness in terms of academia.
And actually the talent and the flow of that talent through the ecosystem, which you've referenced as well, Mark, is really critical part of the system, and kind of then will lend itself into the agenda that you're driving in terms of the scaling up the companies, the existing companies, and spinning out new companies.
No, absolutely. And just a couple of points to follow up on, because I think they're brilliant examples of how multinationals, SMEs working together. Some of that takes place in the context of the research centres that we jointly fund, IDA and Enterprise Ireland. But I think going forward, that connectivity between the Research Ireland research centres and other research centres, gateways that are out there, how can we ensure that journey of idea, the journey the flow of talent over and back into industry, back in, I think that's going to be critical in terms of how we can together better shape the economy. But I just want to go back on the international piece because it's an important one. And if you think of the ethos of open innovation, we're a tiny country. You know, we need to be not just looking at doing better, connecting internally, but connecting externally. Horizon Europe, and it's been referenced, is a massively important programme for Ireland, and we're doing pretty good at it. So 960, Kevin's in the audience somewhere, Kevin Burke, our National Director, but I think it's 966 million against a national target of 1.5 billion, and many of the researchers in the room are connected on that. But one example, and I think it's a good example, which is a fund or a particular programme that came out of that, and it's one of our client companies, Ubotica, that's in it, and it is called Neurosoc, and there are 17 partners, I believe, within it, not just within Europe, so UK, Switzerland, large companies, Thales, Bosch, and it's in the whole area of edge commuting. So if you think of the benefit for a small SME to be involved in a research program with big multinational companies, with the thought leaders right across Europe. So the benefit of that and the value for Ubotica as it goes to scale its business internationally. We have a target of 55 billion in export sales. So think about that, 55 billion worth of export business coming from Ireland. You know, it'll come from innovation and ideas that are connected in Ireland and globally. And then just the final point, I do think it has to be more than Europe. I think UK has to continue to be a critically important partner for obvious reasons, trade, culturally, otherwise. We're getting a lot of interest from the Middle East at the minute. We have a delegation coming in from the UAE next week, and the US. You know, if everything that's happening in the US has done one thing, which is hopefully to help deregulate things in Europe, but there's opportunities in the US, and I think together we need to be better aligned and better connected in securing some of that talent.
Absolutely. I think, Mark?
Yeah, just one thing I want to call out if I could. I just think the problem we also have is we always end up by saying, like, well, will we, our objective here is to have multilateral communications and coordination. The objective here is to have this amount of jobs or to grow the economy in this amount is exactly the wrong way. If you were a startup, you would absolutely fail 99% of the times if you did that. As you want to think like a startup, and the definition of a startup is an organization that creates a product or service in extreme uncertainty, which is essentially everybody right now, right? And the first thing you do, the predictor of success, is fall in love with the customer problem, not the solution that you are attached to, the research project, the customer, the client, the multinational that you want to serve better. What's the problem you're solving? Now, if you do that, suddenly that presents itself with certain routes. So National Weather Services, Met Éireann, has to work with other Met services on supercomputers to have better modeling. A really big opportunity, by the way, because of regulation, is explainability, ethics, security. We would need to be working directly with the multinationals to work out exactly how we hold them to account for those models. But let's say something like peer-to-peer energy supplies. Small community in Ireland, we want to make sure that people have solar panels that might start trading energy with each other. An absolutely local solution to a problem that will require that kind of cross-functional group. And again, to the example of my company, we had a machine learning engineer in a small office in Dawson Street who had a British public funding grant. He had long-term security about that grant and decided to jump when he came to Ireland. He sat with a journalist from Syria who had to escape Syria because of human rights abuses, and another machine learning engineer and a CTO and me. And I had told Spotify that we had a way of understanding with speech to text how we could detect extremist movements plotting violent campaigns. And theoretically we did, but when I went in the next morning and told them I promised this, the look on their faces of total horror. Within 24 hours, we had gone off and we'd gotten a podcast with the most extreme regional Irish accent to see if we could understand, the machine could understand it. We'd built a small little data set from this person who's an expert in Arabic, and the machine learning engineer, I'd never forget, almost in tears, because his job now was to create that pattern recognition. And that was the product that began the sale of our company. But again, it all happened in literally a room of 25 square foot. And again, the problem was the focal point. And I'm not saying valorizing this particular, but this is what's happening. It's out of sight of the planning process. So solve your problem first, and that lends itself to deciding whether it's working with Marina. And I've happened to, in the same company, worked with both EI and IDA. And I just think we get attached too much to the outcomes and the sectors and the big bets other people are making, or the need to have China balancing the United States. Donald Trump's going to be gone in 4 years. But we may have a cure for cancer because of AI, and 25% of the population are unemployed.
Yeah.
Like the idea of planning, instead of saying, well, let's take those apart and look at the problems, and do they need a thoroughly Irish research team, or do they need a relationship with the multinational? Do we need to partner with China? Start from the problem definition. And then finally, on the idea of like we have to have certainty, I take your point. Jeff Bezos has a great line about stay stubborn on the vision and agile on the detail. Have a great North Star idea of what you're trying to do generally, and then be really good at learning and being agile. And the first solution you have to a problem, 9 out of 10 times, will fail. Your customer will look at you and go, meh. And you will learn why that's not good enough, and you will move on. And that's the process of innovation that happens in the hothouse of startups. If that's not replicated in any way you're planning your innovation strategy as a country, that's where you suddenly get this trough of disappointment. And people in the room now will not feel that applied science is being valued, and other people will let the startups not being valued. And if we're thinking that by the end of the day today, we're not making progress.
Okay. And in terms of, and I'm going to have to
I know.
cut the conversation now in a second, but really quickly, I guess something that I'm struck by, Mark, in terms of really focusing on what is the problem, and then how do you find a solution to that problem? Who do you need to bring together to address that problem? Early on in the conversation, you mentioned IP being a big barrier, and we've had a lot of conversation about open innovation. If you wanted to truly move to a fully open innovation model, open IP, is that something that, it's not something Ireland does? Now, this is probably a big question to throw in right at the end when I'm going to the audience, but it is something that does come up quite a bit, and maybe we can accelerate innovation more if we move away from focus on who owns the IP and how you license
it's a
it.
problem to be solved. Like, for example, Ireland has in the RT archive the best archive of audiovisual in the Irish and English language in the world, right? And it's an oil field, effectively. But we have no way of monetizing it for the benefit of the country. We could get a big one, RT could get 100 million from OpenAI tomorrow. But what about, for example, putting that under a kind of a civic Creative Commons license for technology, where universities manage the RT archive, and they have their machine learning engineers coming in and working out ways to understand, let's say, the structure of the Irish language over time. And then a company comes along and goes, we want to give you 100 million. No, you can get access to this under a Creative Commons license, and anything you derivative create, like, so BERT was the big NLP transformer, became Roberta, Wave to Vec, all built on top of open source. It was still the technology companies creating the open source licenses. If Ireland Inc. was doing that with things like creative work in this country, I talked to Jimmy Wales last week, and again, I'm not breaking any science, but I was really interested in, like, what if he brought Wikipedia to Ireland, building on top of that in a way that had a civic license, because open source is not necessarily without its risks, but this idea of having essentially technology that can be accessed under certain licenses for certain organizations, some civic, some commercial. Ireland in that situation suddenly becomes the solution to an entirely sort of whole new set of problems, and then becomes very much more sovereign in itself, but also contributes to a startup like mine, who doesn't want to have to unpick the IP at the end when a piece of the technology stack down the bottom is public IP, but I've already built the whole stack on top of it. That's the real problem we start with here.
Great, certainly something for Marina and myself to discuss more. Matt, quickly, and then we're going to go to the audience.
Yeah, certainly. I'm not sure if we can go to fully open IP. Last year, the multinational sector in Ireland spent 1.9 billion on R&D. So significant investment. If you take away their IP from them or make it in an open, that becomes less attractive as a proposition. Maybe the challenge is not around IP. Maybe the challenge is around research infrastructures. And, I know a number of companies, if I go back into a manufacturing base, that they collaborate with the research, like, say, in a pharma sector, traditional pharma sector, collaborate with a research center like NIBRT in bioprocessing, simply because they have their research facilities there. And in NIBRT, and that allows industry to collaborate, it allows academics to be involved. But IP is still a really important part here. I know IDA worked with IBM to support industry fellowships in UCD and Trinity, and the IP was held by the industry. So there's different models that you can apply. You need it to be as attractive as you can to encourage academics to flourish and develop excellent science, but also IP to be exploited, delivered, and given competitive advantage in terms of industry. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all, because that type of research investment in terms of facilities and infrastructures may not be required in things like AI. Like I'm counting, there's around 40 to 45 R&D AI hubs that are housed by industry in Ireland at the moment. So that is flourishing without government support. But you don't need the significant research infrastructure facilities in something like AI, I would argue, that you would need in something like manufacturing and health and connected health.
Great, thank you. Marina.
Just a very, very quick point. I mean, I think we need to look at all of this. I think whether it's foreground, background, open, whatever, I think what's clear to us is industry is not engaging at scale with the research ecosystem. That's the challenge. It's also the opportunity. So how do we make it easier? How do we make it much more accessible? How do we make it quicker for businesses when they do find the research team, the idea, to take it to the marketplace? So it's being more business friendly and more open.
Great, thank you. Very quickly.
I agree, and two things, right, in relation to IP. I think as open as possible, as close as necessary, so that we can continue to work with the companies that we're engaging with. And I think it's very important, right? Yeah, we're doing very well as a country, right? But I think that we're not yet leading on the innovation space. There needs to be more investment. Michael referred it to earlier in terms of the need for bigger budget for Research Ireland, for all of the investment in research and innovation across all the agencies and the companies. Yes, Matt, I know that their companies are putting a significant amount into R&D, but not enough. For us to be leading on a world scale, we have to put more into that. And final point is that, going back to I agree with Mark 100%, let's look at how are we going to satisfy those customers? It's the customer needs that we have to address, and the technologies should be supporting that. And I'll finish overall from an educational perspective. We are, and I think a lot of people have seen the latest, we are on a per capita basis the highest educated country in the world, 52.4% with a bachelor's or higher. But I would argue, and this goes back to the startups, are we educating job takers, or do we want to create more job makers, right? So I think it's important. Fail fast, fail often. Let's get that entrepreneurial mindset from an R&D perspective into our graduates, so more companies, more startups, more R&D activities with the companies will emerge.
Great. So unfortunately we're out of time now, but what I would encourage you is to continue the conversations. We're going to have a coffee break now in a moment, and so please continue the conversations. I'm sure our panel members will be roaming around, delighted to have a conversation with you. If you've ideas you want to input, you haven't had a chance, continue to input. We are compiling all of the input that has come. So I'd like you to join me in thanking our panel for a really insightful discussion today. Thank you.